I'm Andrew Patterson. Welcome to interest.co.nz. With me today, Steve Sims, Executive Director and co-founder of Tomizone, a business probably many people have had a chance to use. Steve, welcome to interest.co.nz.
Nice to see you, Andrew.
So, Steve, tell us a little bit about the business, how it got started.
We started because Wi-Fi wasn't necessarily that popular back in 2006. It was internationally, but not in New Zealand. The internationalisation of Wi-Fi meant that visitors to New Zealand were looking for gigantic Wi-Fi networks when they arrived here, and we also had some ideas on how to make it really easy for people to use Wi-Fi, not only in this country but around the world. So essentially we put together a platform that knew how to turn people onto the internet really quickly, and also helped the owners of the Wi-Fi hotspots monetize their broadband connection. So Tommyzone came out of a word, turn on my internet zone. So that's as simple as it got.
Okay, that's clever. I didn't realise that. And therefore, the concept was simply to provide this seamless platform where people could access their internet at any point.
The whole idea is that you could roam from one Wi-Fi hotspot to the next without having to repay another fee or click another button to rejoin it. So by having a seamless roaming platform, it meant that if someone, for instance, bought some time on Tommyzone in Auckland and they landed in Sydney at Starbucks, they could continue to use that time over there as well. So the whole idea is it was an international roaming platform for data, which is something that seems to be a bit of a bugbear for anyone that has a 3G account these days when they roam.
So how innovative was that concept at the time?
Very innovative. Data roaming didn't really exist back in those days, and if anything, it's now exploded with growth. And you know, you've got to take your hat off to a lot of the manufacturers like Apple, who came out with the iPhone. The explosion of Wi-Fi pretty much happened at that point in time. It was kind of like a rebirth of the whole industry.
Obviously a few speed bumps along the way as well too. What are some of the problems that you've encountered during the company's growth?
Well, the GFC suddenly hit us around about 18 months after we started. So in that respect, we had wonderful funding from K1W1, Sir Stephen Tyndall, to really develop the product and grow the market. And then the GFC hit us, and funnily enough, we managed to coast through that one through our product development, through the funding that we had, and also through our customer growth. And it was validation of the market as well. To be fair, if it wasn't for the iPhone or the growth of the Wi-Fi at that particular time in mid-GFC, I think we'd be in a fairly interesting position now.
How difficult was it to attract capital at that particular point?
Initially, with our initial idea, it was actually quite hard to attract capital. However, we did end up with a number of suitors during our proposal stage, and we certainly chose K1W1 as our suitor and investor partner. The smart money that K1W1 offered, as well as Sir Stephen's commitment to helping our company grow, was absolutely fundamental in the first few years of our business growth.
Just explain the business model involved here in this business in terms of how you make your money and how the revenue side of it works.
So essentially people can either pay for Wi-Fi or get Wi-Fi for free. If you are getting Wi-Fi for free, someone is paying for it. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone is sponsoring your free lunch. So the revenue model for Tommyzone is through airtime or through management fees or through integration charges. So essentially that's our top line revenue items, and essentially we then give some of that airtime revenue back to the owners of the hotspots or zones. Or in some cases, for instance, where they're being provided free, we're being paid a management fee to look after and make sure that there's a quality free service being offered. A case in point is with Sydney Airport, for instance, where they're offering free services right across their international and domestic terminals. And our role in that is to make sure that ads are played in the correct format, that the users are having a very simple experience, and they're having a quality experience on the internet without any trouble.
I was staying in Wellington recently, and the broadband charges, or the charges through the Tommyzone system, seem to be quite expensive. That's obviously something you don't have a lot of direct control over.
When it comes to accommodation providers, there are some varied thoughts, and depending on the style of property. You usually find that if it's a lower star property, it's either cheaper or free, and if you're staying at a 5-star hotel, it's more expensive, and people scratch their head saying, why am I paying to get on the internet when I'm already paying $1 gazillion a night to stay here? What we're seeing in the industry is that there's a race to free, but the problem is that that there's not a lot of quality service providers out there that can do that. I mean, with the exception of Tommyzone, of course. But we are seeing in the accommodation sector the costs of internet access being buried in room rates or being provided free in a scenario. We do that right now, for instance, with Sheraton Dinner Villas in Fiji. You go there for a week, you get free internet. But in the background, what we're doing is we're providing the free service for those customers and guests that stay there. So we are starting to see a bit of a churn towards free, and the more expensive internet options of some of these accommodation providers, I believe, will disappear within the next 5 years.
That's how quickly it's moving now, you think?
In some cases, in some sectors, it's moving even faster. So we're starting to see the race to free and being able to offer those quality services is being a problem. I mean, if you travel internationally now, let's say you go through Vietnam, for instance. I went through there, and the owner of the cafe would just give you their WPA security key. Well, that's all very interesting, and you've got free internet, and that's great, but there's no quality layer of service on there. And secondly, the cafe owner isn't necessarily monetising that with, let's say, an ad that you see before you go on. But even worse is that that cafe owner has no idea who you are. And particularly in these secure times where you talk about cyber law security and downloading BitTorrents and things like that, there's a lot more accountability starting to come in around the world with these kind of systems that need to be in place. And that's something that we've developed here in New Zealand, particularly around cyber law security and things like that, with these services that we've been providing for many years in India. So we have a patent on being able to identify a user at the end of a Wi-Fi connection, for instance, which is very important if there's any nefarious activity that's going to go on online. So these are the challenges that we're starting to see with a fast-changing environment, is that people are starting to ask the questions, well, how do I know that my internet connection is going to be safe from Johnny over there who's going to use it, and he's not going to hack into my computers, or he's not going to download objectionable content that I'll get in trouble for? And so those kind of layers of security and authentication and things are the reason why companies like Tommyzone exist, because we help those owners take away that risk.
What about in sort of low-income areas, for instance, where you could have one person pays for the broadband and then shares it amongst 5 or 6 families? Is that a trend that you think could be possible in the future as well?
Yeah, we've seen it, and in some cases you've got to have an enthusiastic participant to make it work, and then on top of that you've got to have enthusiastic customers, if you like, around that area that are happy to do that, to share the internet cost. We do see that a lot in areas that are in developing nations. Pretty much in developed nations you don't see that now, because the pricing of broadband or Wi-Fi is cheap enough for everyone to participate. So the sharing of broadband in a residential sense is now down to accountability. You know, a bunch of flatmates, who's using all the broadband? I mean, do you chip in the even amount, or hang on a second, Barry's a big downloader whereas Mary's not? So those are where these systems can help, but it's not extremely popular as one would guess in a gigantic residential environment or an urban environment where you share your broadband.
So what percentage of the market does Tommyzone have within New Zealand in terms of the area that you're operating in?
Well, our specific segments, we're well into the 80s, but there are a number of providers out there that are very niche, that specifically cater for some chains. You look at McDonald's in New Zealand, they provide their service from their telco provider Telstra. Or you look at other backpacker hostels, they may have some smaller operators in there operating in that sense. But from an accommodation sector, certainly from Metro Wi-Fi and a few other sectors such as airports, we're right up there.
And so where's the growth potential going to be in the future?
The growth potential, funny enough, is still in metropolitan Wi-Fi, accommodation sector, which is the race to free, and certainly transport hubs such as airports. That's where we're going to see a lot of growth in offering quality services. One other area that is starting to emerge, which will be announced fairly shortly at the Wireless Broadband Alliance Forum up in Korea, is the Next Generation Hotspot initiative. And this is where there's seamless roaming between a mobile operator and a Wi-Fi operator. That is the biggest growth area that we're probably going to start to see in the next 3 to 5 years, where you as a mobile phone customer won't know whether you're using your data on Wi-Fi or you're using it on the mobile network. And so it's a way that a user can actually get a good seamless experience between the two technologies, but at the end of the day, the user is still just getting the internet. So, turn on my internet zone is essentially what the customer wants, and so that seamless roaming between technologies where the customer doesn't know what's going on is what you're going to start to see. Now that means that if you're a Wi-Fi operator such as Tommyzone, you've got the opportunity to actually get some revenue from a lot of the 3G operators, 4G operators that are offloading their customers onto Wi-Fi. So what we're starting to see is that that's an emergent trend that you'll see in the next 3 to 5 years.
So therefore, one would think that at some point one of the telcos might be interested in buying you out.
Well, to be fair, the telcos have got their own game to play at the moment, and what we're seeing in European circles, for instance, is that telcos are taking more of a partnering approach with the people that have made the investment. I mean, to be fair though, a mobile tower costs a lot of money to make, whereas a Wi-Fi zone costs a fraction. So, the business case is there, or sometimes it's not there. It'll be interesting to see how that emergent strategy works in the future.
This is a business that's gone global fairly quickly as well too, which has allowed you to expand fairly rapidly.
Yes, we have. In fact, we've got presence in, believe it or not, 107 countries according to our system, and that's where we've got hotspots globally. But we're quite serious in markets, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, in the local Australasian market, and internationally, India and China are our big markets that we're quietly doing some development in the background in terms of our sales opportunity. With India, we've been there for quite some time with a good viable business there, and when that market starts to mature, you'll start to see some massive growth with Tommyzone services.
In the space that you operate in, what about the competition aspects involved? How competitive is this space?
It's very competitive. We usually find that there's a new provider of some sort arriving every couple of months. They tend to be very niche oriented, and so that's good for us because we are niche but also cross sector. So in that respect, being an enabler of what we do means that we fit quite nicely into a number of segments without experiencing a great deal of competitive pressure.
And in terms of your aspirations from this point, where would you like to see the business in 3 or 5 years' time?
Oh, somewhere in the region of a good massive turnover of revenue, with profitability being imported back to New Zealand. We were born a New Zealand company, but born global, and our whole idea is to import as much cash back to New Zealand as possible, because that's essentially how we're going to grow in this country. It's much cheaper to export bits and bytes and intelligence than it is to ship a lamb off to London.
In terms of staffing numbers, you don't actually need to employ a lot of staff here, do you?
Our global company is run by 15 people.
Which is quite extraordinary when you think about the sort of reach that you have. That might be something of a record, isn't it, versus the number of countries you're operating in?
Well, I guess if you were to be a bean counter and put a bunch of efficiency graphs over it, it could be quite an interesting result. But to be fair, it's a scalable business, and it's scalable in the fact that we use a lot of channels that sell on our behalf. We also have a lot of self-activation stuff that happens as well. So we don't actually need a lot of physical bodies to make things happen. And it's always been our dream from the beginning to make it really, really simple for someone to participate with a self-activated scenario, to get online, and also for the owner not to worry about anything or having to set up people ready to wait for someone to fail, because the system doesn't fail generally.
So with the offshore operations, you're doing those on a partnership basis?
No, we're actually doing them as wholly owned subsidiaries. So we have a wholly owned foreign entity in China, for instance, and the same kind of entity in India. So it is all of our own people and our own sales and marketing team.
And your own IP as well.
Absolutely, yes, and that's quite important when you look at markets such as China. We say as an enabler, we love you, Mr. Customer, but what we're going to do, like KFC, is we'll give you 11 herbs and spices, but we keep 6 of them. So that way customers can go and give it a go if they want by themselves, but they'll find that they're missing the vital 6 ingredients to make it really, really seamless and cool.
And you're profitable at the moment?
Yes, we are. Yes, and have been now for almost a year.
And you would encourage those operating at the moment, thinking of sort of moving into this technology space, a few lessons, a few tips for people to think about?
Well, the first thing that you should do is validate your market by looking at it very, very closely with who's competing. Always ask the question, I believe, is where else can these services be got for free that you're trying to invent? So in the app space, for instance, we're starting to see that ever since that emerged, is where can that application be bought for free? Well, the same thing applies in business. And so if people can buy that service for free, how are they doing it and why they're doing it? Is that because they've got someone big and funded behind them that's just giving it away as a loss leader to attract them to an upsell? And once you've validated your product idea or your concept or your service, jump on a plane and go and smell and feel the markets that you want to go and go into. I absolutely insist that if you are starting some kind of tech business in New Zealand, that it should be internationally born. It shouldn't be a local market thing. I mean, with due respect to the 4.5 million people in New Zealand, you are not going to make money as a tech business unless you've got a really popular product that 50% of New Zealand's market can go and get today. There's a lot of fish to fry around the world, and it doesn't cost that much in terms of time and money to plonk yourself into Shanghai or into Mumbai or into London. So have an international focus is what I would say to anyone in the tech space that wants to look at it for the first time ever.
Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Andrew.